So, Ty, you said that you haven't seen much about the impeachment trial yet?
No, this has been a weird week for me. My schedules have kind of been all over the place, so I've just kind of been passing out when I get home, and I have not paid attention at all to what's been going on this week.
You know what I thought about the other day? That is on purpose, because, like, I was thinking about how while we're all working, it's very busy for us to kind of stay politically active or politically aware at the very least. And I think that's by design. Like, you know, if we're all working and we're toiling every day, we can't realize what's going on. And that's why this time is so dangerous, because people are at home thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it's no accident that, you know, the protests, like the Black Lives Matter protests, really took off during the middle of the pandemic. I think when people were out of work, it was easier to stay active, stay in the know, and, you know, hit the streets. And now that, I guess, you know, some people are starting to get back to work, they don't have as much time. And that makes it harder to make a difference and really know what's going on.
And reason being also is just because in this game that we play called capitalism, you have to work in order to survive. So it's not like you can just take a break off of working and be like, you know what, I'm going to focus on activism and not, you know, have to take care of your bills and stuff. Unless, of course, you have the Honorable Elijah Muhammad buying your house and everything, such as we discussed in our episode 2 weeks ago when we discussed Malcolm X.
Yep. Also, numbers for COVID are really high, too,
so
it's really hard to get into big groups and do stuff, right? You know, like COVID's like soaring.
Depending on what the group is, yeah. But for those of you who haven't been aware of exactly what's happening with the impeachment trial, I watched it with my wife for as much as we could stomach, and it was a lot. It was actually hours of the Democrat managers presenting their case against Donald Trump, providing a timeline, which was one of the most shocking things, because at the time that the group storming the Capitol was declared a riot, Trump had just finished his rally. So he didn't even finish the rally before shit got out of hand. Before they started marching.
Listen, it wasn't his fault, okay?
Yeah, I mean, how are you gonna blame this guy? You know, but then they're also like they're going back to his older rallies, you know, within the past, you know, few months with the whole Stop the Steal thing, and like they're quoting different nicknames he has for people that his followers are using. They're quoting his rhetoric, and they're going back and forth between them. They're showing never before seen footage, which is incredibly graphic, like security footage that shows, you know, just exactly how barbaric this attack was. And I don't know, it was just rough. It was rough to, you know, we talk a lot about ACAB here, and we got to defund the police and abolish the police and stuff like that. You know, but I've also discussed how I think a lot of people go into law enforcement trying to do the right thing, trying to make a difference, and they are good people who get corrupted by a corrupt system and may not be able to reach their fullest potential to help within that system. And I saw a lot of those people who are literally throwing their lives in the way for politicians, throwing their physical bodies in the way for these politicians, and that was heartbreaking as well. One of them was a veteran, and he said he hadn't seen anything that bad since he was deployed to Iraq.
Man.
The guy that I sent you that video from CNN a while ago, the one who got crushed in between the doors, he actually survived.
I think that was brutal.
Yeah, I found out that that was very heartbreaking to see. And also I know that not everyone will agree with me on this, but you had Ashley Babbitt there, who was I believe a 14-year Air Force veteran, one of the many people who knew how to inflict violence and was ready to inflict violence. She lost her life that day. And I didn't hear them make this argument. Maybe I just stepped away for a sec, but I would have made the argument that woman wouldn't be dead if not for Trump either.
Right.
Like, it's not just the cops who are the victims of Trump's rhetoric here. It's the people who he put in harm's way with no intent of backing them up or anything.
Yeah, no.
You know, the whole time he was literally making phone.
No, I was just saying, I agree with you. I think no matter kind of like where you stand on this issue, right? Whether you're anti-cop or, you know, you don't like Trump supporters, I think seeing somebody die, if you're not a psychopath, will get some sort of emotional reaction out of you, right? Because somebody losing their life, and it just shouldn't happen. Like, you know what I mean? Like we've talked about, even criminals do not deserve to die. You know, you don't deserve to die for anything. You know, that's why we have a prison system that also doesn't work, but no one deserves to die.
Yeah,
so
on paper, that's why we have that.
yes, theoretically it should work to prevent people from dying. But yeah, I mean, I think, if you're not some sort of psychopath, seeing anybody get killed or horribly scarred and injured is just, it's barbaric, like you said. And this event was that, people killing each other, at the Capitol building. All American citizens. It's pretty wild to think about, and even worse probably to see.
Yeah, and I know we mentioned it before, but you do have these people who not too long ago were spouting Blue Lives Matter rhetoric, literally attacking cops. And I'm not talking about, this is also terrible, but like, they're not showing up armed and shooting someone in the face. They are showing up there growling, howling. These are the sounds that are being heard. Like this is shit that was obtained by the FBI from these people's own cell phones. Calling out for Nancy Pelosi. Nancy, we're coming for you. They're banging on doors, and then they have phone calls from the staff, because Nancy was moved the fuck out quick. It was her staffers, her young political upstarts who maybe one day could, have a career in ruining the poor people's lives. They didn't even get that chance because, they were hiding. And the guy's like, you hear the banging on the door, and he's like, we need police here now. They are at the door right now, and we have no one. Like, it was just very frightening. It was Warriors. Chilling stuff. Yeah, their staffers come out and play. But yeah, if on the day we're recording this, the Trump behind the curtain here, the Trump team is presenting their defense. It is rumored that they're not even going to take the full 8 hours that they require. I mean, there really isn't much of a defense, I guess. So by the time this comes out, you listeners will know the verdict. My guess is that it turns my stomach to say this. My guess is that the Republicans don't vote to convict.
That would be so shocking.
Even with all the evidence presented before them.
Of course not. Because, off mic we talked about party allegiance is more important than anything else, And they say he's a Republican, so Republicans are going to continue to back him.
Yeah, he literally put a gun to their head. And they're like, we can totally trust this guy. I know it's rough, man. That's why every side, you need someone who is of the people to represent you. You can't have someone with special corporate interests. These are people whose careers are at stake because of a reality TV star. You don't need someone in public office who owes allegiance to a sociopath or a narcissist like Trump.
Yeah, it can't be good.
It's not safe. It's literally threatened national security, and it could in another 4 years. That's the whole reason this impeachment thing is going on, is because they feel that there's still a good chance that Trump can get elected again in 4 years if he's allowed to run.
Well, I mean, there is a very good chance. I mean, Democrats are starting to already squabble some of the chances they've been given, and I think, in 2 years and in 4 years, I think they're going to lose.
Squander?
Yeah, they're squandering their chances. Like this whole thing with the stimulus, I think, how it was kind of laid out for people and how it's actually occurring were two very different things, and you got to imagine if you're a voter in Georgia who made sure Democrats won, and now they're fighting over whether if you make $50,000 or $75,000, if you're going to get this stimulus check, and you're facing eviction and not being able to put food on the table. You're going to be pretty pissed off. And I think for some people, it's going to be too much for them to trust Democrats' word again, especially when unfortunately under Trump, they did receive a $1,400 stimulus and another $600 stimulus. So it's tough. There's a very good chance that Trump could be reelected in the future, and that's a very, very terrifying thought.
Yeah, I shouldn't be getting more assistance money from a fascist than a... I don't even know how to describe Biden in one word.
A centrist. A centrist. We'll go centrist. Yeah, I mean, listen, it's not like Trump wanted to help people, but it just worked out that way because, he wants to capitalize off of anything that will make him look good. And, that's one thing he has in his corner that he could argue. Hey, I gave people stimulus money. I said give them another $2,000. But if he gets into office again, the country's pretty fucked, so... Be ready for that.
Yeah, we'll see. I hope that it doesn't come to that, but it just might. In the meantime, we have no new reviews. So, listeners, if you want your review read at the top of this show, all you have to do is leave one. We prefer 5-star reviews. It really helps us in the algorithm and gets more listeners. And they get to enjoy the thing that you are enjoying. That being said, Ty, are you ready to bring in the theme song?
Oh, I sure am.
Alrighty then, let's bring it in. Welcome back to the Politipop Podcast, the podcast where we take your favorite pop culture media and discuss the social and political themes within. I am your co-host, Mike Booch, a.k.a. the pseudo-intellectual soy boy, and I'm pleasured to be joined by... So pleasured. My co-host, Ty.
Hey, glad you're pleasured.
Oh, yes, you always provide pleasure to me, and it's greatly appreciated,
It's my
Ty.
goal. It's my goal.
That's right. For those of you who are new to the show, you can find us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube, or you can like and subscribe. You can support us at our Patreon if it's still up by the time I'm recording this, or by the time you're hearing this, rather. And you can find us all over social media. Just search up the Politipop Podcast. All right. Now, guess what, everybody? We are coming to our last stop on the Black History Month Spotlight Tour. Last week we hit Judas and the Black Messiah. Before that, we hit Malcolm X. Before that, we hit what did we hit before that?
The first week we did One Night in Miami.
One Night in Miami, of course we did. And now we are coming to the last station of Black trauma, which is going to be Antebellum. And we are not alone in discussing this. That's right. Today we have with us a very special guest. He goes back with us. He's working in post-production in LA. He is in the industry that we are continuously critiquing and diving into and reading between the lines of. He has worked on Peppermint. He's worked on Underworld Blood Wars. He has worked on Sonic the Hedgehog. And most importantly, the reason he's on this podcast is because he has worked on Antebellum. Please give it up for the man known as Nick.
How are you guys?
Good, man. Glad to have you.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, now, originally we did want to have a black person on this episode, or at least one episode this month. But we did get my cousin last week for Judas and the Black Messiah. So, we talk about, the Latino blood and African blood are very intermingled. So that's the best we could get. We really wanted to get Josh on this episode as well. But schedules just don't work out. So hopefully he'll be on another episode in the future. Now, Nick, before we delve into your background here, I do want to make an announcement at the top that we are not just doing Black History Month. It has been brought to our attention by Ty's girlfriend that the films that we reviewed deal almost exclusively in Black trauma. Today's film, very much so. And I think that while people are attempting to provide a good message or be woke, if you want to call it that it is very easy to revert back to the tale of Black trauma. That woman did a great job playing a slave in a slave movie. It always comes back to that. And it's a thin line to walk, because while we do want to shed light on certain struggles, historical and present, we don't want to be looking at snuff films, and we don't want to see an entire people relegated to just being victims. There are stories of Black triumph just as there are Black trauma, even though those stories may have trauma and struggle in them, because we've mentioned it many times before. If you are a person of color, most likely race plays into your story at some point, whether you know it or not. So next month, we are going to be reviewing Black stories that aren't specifically rooted in historical trauma. We're talking Fast Color, which is a Black superhero movie. We're talking Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse. We're talking others. Okay, and we'll get that scheduled out in the next episode specifically, just so you know what to listen to, everybody. But yeah, so Nick, how long have you been working in film for?
So I've been working. I started as a post-production assistant, and I started about 8 years ago. So I've been in it about 8 years. I've been doing my current level of work for about 6 of those years.
And in addition to that, he's also doing his current level of work for our little indie short, Great Power, that Tyler and I have worked on. I don't want to be like we did these specific things, because we just kind of like did it. Like we did like a lot of different things for the movie. But yeah, Nick has been so gracious as to lend his industry level talent to our short film, and we are incredibly grateful for that and looking forward to sharing it with everyone when it happens.
It's an excellent movie.
Yeah, so we do have another white voice on this podcast. This is a voice that is behind the scenes of this film, and we really didn't want to pass up. We didn't want to pass up this opportunity to get a look behind the curtain. We're going to be asking questions. Nick, hopefully you'll be able to answer most of them, but if you do have to keep things discreet, where we absolutely understand. I sign NDAs all the time as an actor, so
appreciate you.
And we appreciate you right back. So as we mentioned, today's movie is going to be Antebellum. For those of you who aren't aware of what the term antebellum means, it literally means before the war. Obviously, it wasn't widely associated with the Civil War until after the conflict was over. But antebellum kind of became this phrase that harkens back to before the war. And if you're harkening back to that, you're harkening back to slavery, or chattel slavery, I should say, because we really haven't moved on from quote unquote slavery. But yeah, harkens back to chattel slavery. And, as Black Lives Matter protests have been ramping up this past year, a bunch of people have been trying to appease black consumers, such as the band Lady Antebellum. They are a country group who attempted to act like they cared about black people by changing their name to Lady A. It was originally Lady Antebellum. They said, well, that's offensive. We'll be Lady A. Until a black singer whose stage name is Lady A said, well, you can't take it unless you pay me this many $1 million. And they said, well, we'll sue you for it. So that really doesn't have much to do with this movie specifically, but just so you know the term and what it harkens back to, there are actually a lot of terms and there are a lot of subtleties included in this film that do harken back to slavery or segregation, and we may not realize them, but because they are just a part of our life. It's so like interwoven. When you think about, oh, this is the master bedroom in the house. Why was it called the master bedroom?
Yeah. It's just like, we don't think about it, you know.
Now, before we get into it, I want to give everybody a trigger warning. This is a graphic film, so we will be talking about graphic themes. There's obviously, physical violence and death against people who are enslaved, but also there's sexual assault. So just before you move forward, we have that. And also, there is a spoiler warning coming in just after. If you have not seen the movie Antebellum, I highly suggest that you do. It is currently available for streaming on Hulu, or you can purchase or rent it on Amazon Prime Video, or you can subvert all those fucking things and hack your Fire Stick or whatever. That's absolutely fun.
Yeah, whatever works.
But sorry, Nick. You already got paid, right, Nick? That you don't get you don't get anything taken away if we don't stream it, right?
No, of course not.
Okay, good. Just making sure.
You just ended Nick's career. Great.
It's over for me. So
I'll have to ask you what it was like to actually have a career that started in the first place. But yeah, there is a Shyamalan level spoiler, like a Shyamalan level twist in this movie. So just keep that in mind if you listen to the rest of this podcast. But that being said, Ty, let's give him the plot.
Antebellum. Successful author Veronica Henley finds herself trapped in a horrifying reality and must uncover the mind-bending mystery before it's too late.
And of course, this mind-bending reality is a southern plantation during the Civil War. Throughout the movie, we hear like a battle happening in the background, which we're led to believe is the Yankees versus the Confederates. The movie starts off with this quote from Faulkner, I believe, that says, "The past is never dead. The past isn't even past."
I mean, yeah, I think we've been speaking about this all month, kind of that, the idea that racism is gone is such a myth, right? Like you learn in school almost, like the history is like, all right, and Martin Luther King ended racism. and that's kind of like how they want people to feel. But that's clearly not the case. That's why Black Lives Matter, exists. That's why people like Colin Kaepernick, took a knee, because racism is very much alive. It might not be as in your face as it was maybe in the 50s and 60s, right, or before, but it's there. We live in a systematically racist system, and until we really break that down, and I think everyone comes to terms with that, we'll never truly be past it. So yeah, I mean, the quote really fits what the theme of this movie is.
Yeah, we did talk a lot about generational trauma when we were covering Lovecraft Country and Watchmen as well, and how those ripples from history still go through to today. And like, we do have to be aware of that past. We cannot erase history, but also we can't alter it. I think that is the number one thing. There are people who are like, oh, we can just erase history, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's the altering of history and putting it behind a rosier lens than it's really supposed to be. That is the issue.
Well, it's interesting because that's what a lot of like Southern, probably racists will say about getting rid of Confederate statues, right? They say you're erasing the past, you're trying to erase history. When I really don't think that's the case. I mean, it's not like people are going to forget that the Confederacy existed. They just don't need a constant reminder of it everywhere they go. I would imagine it'd be like, having a statue of Hitler in, I don't know, Israel, right? Like I'm sure they don't want a reminder.
Anywhere.
Yeah, I mean,
but yeah.
Every single day of someone who hurt their people, who hurt, many people. No one's going to forget him, but you don't need to walk down the street and be like, oh, look, that's great. So I think that's the big difference between, erasing history and just not having constant reminders everywhere you go of it.
Now, in talking about history, I think that we do have to talk a lot about nostalgia, because this movie is a direct reaction, I believe, to the Trump presidency. They mention there's a lot of vocabulary in there in which the guys are marching with torches at one point, saying blood and soil. This was a term that was coined by the Nazi Party in the 1930s and was later spouted at Charlottesville. We also have the guys calling each other cucks, which came about from the alt-right around 2015, 2016. Hell, I've even used the term when referring to Ted Cruz and stuff. But yeah, I think, this is taking a very literal approach to the idea of make America great again, meaning what do you mean again? Like, when was it great? It's obviously great for white people, blah, blah, blah. But in this movie, they do take it literally. And we have a group of people who are, I think making themselves suffer. I'm going to throw the twist out there right now, as a matter of fact. When we see all these terrible things happening to these enslaved peoples, and I'm going to try and make an important distinction between saying enslaved and slave, to me, it's just the same as saying homeless or someone experiencing homelessness, But when we see all of these terrible things being done to these people, it turns out that this is happening in the modern day, that these individuals have been kidnapped and that they have been brought to a Civil War reenactment land, if you will. And there are some dudes who were just taking it way too literally. And to me, like, they're sleeping in sheds by the fire. They're eating by candlelight. To me, that seems like they're making themselves suffer. Like, they're living in lesser conditions, but they get the benefit of having control over black people. And
yeah, I mean, they're trying to live
really can't fathom
as authentically as possible, right? Like, there's even I believe an enslaved gentleman in the beginning who has like this collar around his neck, right? And that was a real collar they used, back during when slavery really did exist. It was, it was a way to prevent people from escaping, stealthily. Sometimes they had bells on them. Yep. And those kind of things were really used. So these people are trying to be as authentic as possible. And they are in the worst possible ways. Right.
Yeah. Now, Nick, what was the extent of the work, or let's say an overview of the work that you did on this film in post?
So, working in the editing room working with the editor, the assistant editor, so on and so forth.
All right. So that being said, there were a lot of very graphic images and situations in this film. Could you maybe describe some of the stuff that made it onto the cutting room floor that didn't get put into my nightmares?
Well, a lot of it, honestly, it wasn't necessarily physically violent stuff. It was language. Like, there was a lot of language that was ultimately not in the movie. I mean, and I say this because if you look at a lot of the dailies, there are, I think this sort of goes to speak to your point about how racism is still very much alive in modern day society, because there were certainly some white actors, there was white talent, and they took the role-playing aspect of it. They took the acting a little far, and they were unnecessarily, like, there were some moments that just were a little unnecessary, and they didn't make it into the edit. I mean, partially because it wasn't necessarily scripted, but there's one instance I can think of in particular where an extra used the N-word casually in the scene, and they removed it because it was over the top. So it's that kind of thing. That's really the extent of it. It wasn't, there weren't any, like, all the violent stuff that you see, that's all in the script and that's all in the movie.
So, I'm going to assume this extra was one of the quote unquote Confederates?
Yes.
Okay. Because I don't know, like, I was wondering, like, could be like, one of the other extras, like picking cotton and being like, just modern, because they're, at some points these, the people who are quote unquote enslaved, they are using modern dialect, and throughout the whole film, they're the ones using modern, like, dialect, while all the cosplayers, all the LARPers, the Confederate LARPers, are the ones really digging into, well, I'll tell you here, you better get to skipping, boy. I'll tell you, right. Like, they are going full foghorn leghorn, and that right there is a little hint. Watching it a second time is a very interesting watch, because now you know everything. And does it make it worse that these are modern day people put into an enslaved role, or, like, is it just as bad as when their ancestors were enslaved? Like,
no. I mean, listen, I'm a white dude, so I think I can't accurately answer that question.
That should be the subtitle of this fucking podcast.
Yeah, right? It's a different level of wrong, because, I mean, obviously slavery was pretty fucking horrible, right? I mean, you kidnap people and force them to be your slave, right? To be enslaved. That's pretty horrible. But I guess, if you look at it from this perspective, you're now taking people who, have in some ways been able to finally experience freedom, though they're still held back in a lot of ways in the United States of America. But, to all of a sudden have, be kidnapped and be forced to live like this. I mean, you're now, like you said before, with the people actually who were the Confederates, right? They're living a totally antiquated life now. You took these people who go from an age of cell phones and, TVs and cars, and now you're making them, live in the fields by a fire, in like a dumpy shack. So, it has a different level, I think, of difficulty, but, regardless, slavery is horrible. It's monstrous. So I don't think you can really compare the two.
It is difficult to, like, because I was struggling with that in my head as I saw it, because I guess the worst part is, like, we're just used to those things, like in 12 Years a Slave and stuff. Like, we see terrible things happening to enslaved people all the time in the media, and we see those same things happening in this movie. We do see Eden, aka Veronica, who's being raped by this guy who is only referred to as him up until the very end of the movie. He's even credited as him, I believe. But he's raping her, he's branding her, he's beating her. They're doing this to all of these people. But I think the knife is just twisted a little more, because you find out that, like, these people knew about their ancestors experiencing this trauma and now are being forced to experience it. Like you said, they are free people, quote unquote. They are free, they're average citizens, and yet this is happening, and it's and I think what makes it even worse is that Veronica, at least, is a prominent black activist in real life. She is a journalist, and she's always speaking truth to power. Now, there's another character in here whose name is Eli. He's also known as the Professor, so I'm assuming he was an educator. Nick, maybe I just missed this in the plot, but was everybody on this plantation who was kidnapped, were they all like prominent black people? Like, were they all leaders? Were they educators? Like, or would I read into that too much?
Well, I mean, I think it's safe to assume that. I mean, it's never specifically made clear, and it certainly isn't made clear in the script, and it's not made clear even in the dailies, really. I think, but that is the suggestion that the quote unquote Reformation plantation was created to put, I guess, the way that they understand it, uppity people of color back in their place. I think that's supposed to be what that institution represents. It's what they're trying to do. They're trying to take their power back from people they think have stolen their power.
Right. That makes sense.
To me, you know what? That twists the knife a little further too.
Yeah.
And I'm in no way trying to find a silver lining of chattel slavery, but at least from the mind of one of those monsters, it makes sense to be like, all right, we have a lot of work to do building this country. I don't want to do it. I'm going to have these slaves do it. Like, that's what I'm going to do. But in this, we see that at the end of the day, all the cotton that's collected is burned. They are working for nothing. And it's just like you said, Nick, they're just trying to break these people and apparently they were all handpicked by his daughter, but Veronica, who later gets renamed Eden because following in the tradition of taking away names and replacing them with biblical names, she was the one who was handpicked by him, and that is just, it's really disgusting when you think about it, because if you really hate this woman that much, why would you try and have sex with her? To me, It screams Ben Shapiro AOC vibes.
I mean, I think it's about power.
Which is what rape is. You're absolutely right.
Right, it's about power, because when you use sexual assault in that way, it definitely exerts, dominance in a sick way, right? So I think any way that these people can put some sort of power over these newly enslaved individuals is they're going to do it, right? And what better way than that, right? You totally break a person when you use sexual assault, and I think they know this, and that's why he does it, because she does have a fire to her, right? She's a strong person, and I think he's doing whatever he can to take that away from her. And I do also, you were mentioning how traumatic this must be for someone who had, ancestors that were, so you talk about multi-generational trauma, right? People have trauma still passed down, from their ancestors and who might have been enslaved. And now to experience that firsthand can really, really probably damage a person, in ways that we couldn't even begin to understand. I don't even know how you would get over something like this to then experience this in the modern day. And know that, so many people like you went through this, in the 1800s and even in the early 1900s, even though they weren't enslaved anymore, just how bad things still were for people of color.
Now, to see such a strong character like Veronica be put into this position where, even she tells one of the fellow people who's been kidnapped, she says, we have to wait for our moment. The movie actually starts with her being brought back from trying to escape. That's how she gets branded in the first place. But it is, brings up this dialogue, the similar one that we had last week when we were talking about Fred Hampton. Do we do and we've talked about it before too, do we do gradual change, or do we lead the revolution now? It's less about gradual change and more about gradual conformity. Do you you have the people, you have Black Lives Matter Plaza or whatever in Washington. You have, the Democrats kneeling with dashikis, but are they going to pass any legislation that's going to help black people? Like, at what point do the people take it into their own hands? And I might be reading into that struggle a bit. I'm not positive if I saw it with Veronica necessarily, but that is, I definitely think it's, something to think of and something that this film puts in your head.
Kim's choice of kidnapping Veronica and having her put in the Reformation plantation, my understanding of the story is that, typically the people that they kidnap are not, they're not high profile targets. Like, they're educated, but they're not high profile the way that Veronica is more of a high profile person. And that's why that's why Elizabeth doesn't want her kidnapped in the first place, because they know it's going to draw attention to their movement.
Which it does, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that him, or in this case, the senator, insists on making that move, that becomes a problem later as Elizabeth establishes in that sort of very drawn out scene where she's trying to kill her.
Well, I think, being a high profile target, there's a bigger search for her. And if you want to really break it down, I mean, how many people of color don't get justice, right? But being someone who is so well known, I think when there's, the opportunity to rescue her, of course, there's going to be a big, a ton of police sent. They're going to put their resources into saving her because, they need that publicity. Whereas, if you're a nobody, if you're just a regular average person, they might not really put as much into rescuing you. So I think that's probably another statement there, whether intentional or not. But it definitely is another reason why I'm sure they would not want to kidnap someone like as high profile as she is, like you mentioned. So there's a quote in the very beginning when we first see the plantation that just kind of I thought it was interesting, right? The Confederate soldier, he tells the enslaved woman that he's going to tame her savage ways, and he beats her and tortures her like a savage, right? Like it's just like unbelievable, because this really did happen, right? This is like, this not this particular event, but this is what happened to enslaved people, back in the days, and they really believed they were taming them, right? They were making them better by abusing them in this way, and it's just so ironic to me that this, that they considered what they were doing not to be savage.
Well, that's always been the hypocrisy of white supremacy, and we discussed it with Malcolm X. When you say, "Oh, you're coming at us with hate," black nationalists are full of hate. Black Lives Matter is about hate. And it's like, okay, you are the ones who are deciding what the word hate is. You're the ones who are deciding what violence, and I'm saying these in quotes, is. But think about where would we have learned that from in the first place? Like, you're saying that other people are savages, but you're beating, raping, branding people. Like, you are the most savage of us all. And if there is any savagery that's being pushed back upon you, guess what? You have only yourself to thank for that.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at this with during slavery. You can look at this during colonizing, right? I mean, it's just it's a cycle of being, acting savagely and then acting like the victim. Right, which we still see today with people. They all of a sudden, when someone lashes out back at them, they're like, "Whoa!" Like with savages, right? Like you can't do that to me. And I feel like we've seen this so many times.
Yeah, poor Gina Carano. She didn't deserve to get kicked off The Mandalorian for talking shit about trans people, even though the lead in the show has a trans sister.
It wasn't even why she was fired.
Trans sister. Sorry, it sounded like I said transistor.
That whole thing is just such a shame. I mean, it's just, she's the worst.
I was gonna say, I'm like, yeah, I know Nick's a big Gina fan, and I feel bad.
No, she's just the worst.
Yeah, she is. I'm gonna go on record and say she's not a great actress either, in my opinion. But
I feel the same way. I don't think she's great, but it like, as a Star Wars fan, it's so hard for me to get through some episodes because I know how awful she is. And it's like, why am I watching this show that she's in? And I'm glad that Lucasfilm made the decision to cut her loose because we don't need that.
And they gave her several chances too. So I mean, I think it was time to cut the cord.
Well, they were thinking. I mean, they had been sort of planning. Well, not planning, but they've been looking for a reason to fire her since November after the last outrageous thing that she posted, and this was sort of the final straw because it was really far out there.
Somebody fist pumped her and was like, "Got her."
Yeah.
Chris Pratt, you better watch your back, bro, because you might be next. But it depends. Disney is willing. I mean, they've definitely been willing to take some liberties with stuff. When they were releasing anti-Japanese propaganda, like anti-Axis power stuff, the Pentagon actually had to tell them to back off a bit because they were like being too racist with the Japanese caricatures, and they were like, "Yo, like we got to live with these people after this. Like they're Japanese in America. Like you can't." The Pentagon was telling Disney.
Well, they've built an image now, though. They've built this family-friendly image that has earned them billions of dollars. So they're not going to put that in danger anymore. So I think. Anytime they're in that position, they're gonna make a call like this.
Yeah, I agree with Nick that it kind of does take you out of the film when you see an actor like that, and it was the same with me for when I saw Gina there. I'm like, ugh, like, and the little liberal part of me that still exists. Originally, it was happy to just be like, oh, there's a woman on screen doing cool things, and then once I found that shit out, I was like, all right, then it doesn't matter. And then by the end of the second season, when you have fucking 4 badass women in the same scene, well, I guess one of them's gonna die off screen in a TIE fighter accident before season 3 premieres. Oh well. But speaking of being taken out of it, let's take a break from the plantation real quick and go to modern day, which is where we find out that Eden is actually Veronica. Janelle Monáe plays her, and she has a husband, a daughter. There's a quick shot where, and Nick, you probably know what I'm talking about, where we're seeing her home, and there's a shot of her on a horse. So I guess, did they feel they needed to put that in to be like, oh, well, everyone's going to wonder how she rode a horse at the end if we don't show a picture of her riding the horse at the beginning?
No, I think that was just something that they threw in for good measure. I don't think that was particularly... I don't think that was something that they planned to do. They probably just like, oh, hey, maybe this is a throwback that somebody will notice, and that's what they did. I really don't think that.
No foreshadowing there.
I don't think that there was any intention of there being any foreshadowing. I mean, granted, I don't have it directly from Gerard and Chris, but that's how I feel about it personally. That's what my opinion is.
I mean, it also seems that she's pretty wealthy, right? So she's living a pretty good life, it seems. I think they're just showing kind of the life she's used to, right? There's even a line where like I think someone in the family was like, are we vegan this week? The struggle is real. And it's just kind of like, they're,
yeah,
I thought was funny. It's just like, they kind of can do whatever they want, right? They're in a good position where they can do that, and she's been able to carve out a pretty good life for her and her family.
I don't know, like, again, I think this may have been another one of those things where they just wrote it, and I'm not sure they put that much thought into it. I don't know for sure, but I don't necessarily think they were trying to make a commentary on her how much money she had or
her equestrian abilities.
Yeah, I mean, I think
about her money. Okay,
the idea
we read between the lines, all right, man. We look at this stuff more than we probably need to, but that's what we do.
The idea, I think that they, based on my observation of what was done, is that they're making a point that she's not a slave, and that she's not. She doesn't live the chattel lifestyle.
She's a leader.
Yeah, right. She's in a position of power, and she's earned quite a lot, and she has a respectful life. I think that's just generally the idea.
Now, as we go to the modern day, I messaged you earlier this morning, Ty, when I was rewatching, and I was really fucked up by the film watching it again. And I feel bad that when I had initially watched it, I watched it with Josh, because like even if you're a person of color, even if you do have white friends who are allies, them constantly being like, oh, I saw this thing about this. Oh, can you believe this person got shot? Like, you just keep throwing the shit in their faces. It's kind of a bit much.
Yeah.
And like now upon watching this again, like I told you, Ty, I was like, this is excessive to me. Like, I was actually really disturbed by the stuff I was seeing. And in the modern day, there is a subtlety to everything that I absolutely love. When she's at the hotel, she's staying in the Jefferson suite. We see that actually throughout the entire movie, and I think this was done very purposefully. You can correct me if I'm wrong, or if you think I'm wrong, but throughout this movie, we see white people in very few roles. We see them A, as villains, B, as servers who we don't even see their faces, which I think is very purposefully, and C, we see the one token white friend. And I think that was great, and I didn't even notice it the first time. But like, that's where we see, black people in a lot of media. Yeah.
I have a great story about one of the scenes.
Ooh, yeah, please.
So there's a scene that in the movie, you guys know what I'm talking about, where the three girls, they're in their separate ride shares and they're on their way back from dinner, and Dawn and
I like that moment a lot.
Yeah, there's the scene where Veronica is literally being kidnapped in the back of a car, and then Dawn and the other girl, they're partying. I'm trying to remember what her character's name is. It's
token white friend,
Sarah. Yeah, so Dawn and Sarah, they're partying in the back, and they're like, messing with the Uber driver and whatnot. But there's so the actress who plays Dawn, Gabori, she is one of the most phenomenal improvisation artists that I've ever seen working on a movie. She's just remarkably good at what she does.
She has a really great presence on screen, absolutely.
Well, so what happened, so there's a take where they're in the back of the car and they're singing, and Sarah, so they're listening to the music and singing, and Sarah goes, "Oh, this is my jam." And Dawn says, "Girl, isn't this the song you play when you want someone to come over and just eat you out and make you a sandwich?" And the Uber driver, like the extra who was playing the Uber driver, was not expecting that. And the look on his face, he just goes, "Oh, wow." And they went with it. They rolled with it for a little while, and then when they call cut, the first thing that the Uber driver says before the camera even stops rolling, he says, "Wow, that got graphic." It was so good.
That's hilarious.
It was such an incrable moment.
That's pretty funny.
That's art right there, man. That's fucking beautiful.
That was. But she had a lot of. I mean, Gabori had a lot of moments like that. She had a ton of moments where she just improv this like really over the top stuff, and it always worked. Like, it was hard to pick takes for her in editing because of just how remarkable she was.
I'm sure it seems like a curse. You almost have too many good things to choose from.
Well, I mean, so just to clarify, my primary responsibility on the movie was to script all of the scenes as they would come in. And basically what that means is I was responsible for going through all of the dailies, all the footage, and I had to link all of the footage to a digital version of the script in the Avid. And if there are lines that are not that are improv or that are changed and they're not in the script or they're different in the script, I have to transcribe it into the script so that the editor knows exactly where to find it.
Oh, okay, cool.
Like, I observed a lot of those sort of those moments, but just to circle back and finish up your point, I think it was very intentional to address this stark difference between...
Oh, yeah, that is what I was talking about.
Yeah, this stark difference between Veronica and the position that she's in and how the other white people are in their positions. But I think more so, the intention was to address the microaggressions between white people and people of color.
Yeah.
Yep.
100%. There were a lot of those in there.
There's that scene in the restaurant where they're sitting down and they're about to order, and the waiter says, "How about a bottle?" I think it was a bottle of prosecco or something like that. And they look at him and they're like, what the hell? And then Veronica closes the menu and she says a bottle of Krug, and they order a nice bottle of champagne. And then Dawn says something like Prosecco, just ridiculing it because it was such a ridiculous suggestion, as if they were poor and couldn't afford, the quality champagne, so to speak.
And the assumption, of course, is because they were black, they were poor.
Exactly.
Just because you talked about the moment where she's getting kidnapped, that also I think was very effective, because we have these two parties in identical cars. Veronica is going where she thinks is home, and we have her friends who are going to party the night away, and they're both in identical cars, except one of them is currently being very inefficiently kidnapped, I think. I feel like this idiot Jasper forgot to grab the chloroform because he just reaches his hand around her face. I don't kidnap people on the regular. I just feel like I've seen enough movies to know how to properly kidnap a person.
He soaks his hand in chloroform for an hour beforehand. That's why.
He goes, I have a very hairy palm, and I put it over her face.
It actually works way better. There's no evidence.
Yeah, you have those hairy palms. They're great for traction, too. But yeah, so you also have her friends who are jamming out to Lizzo in the other car right next to them. Like, they have a chance to see, however, I think the windows might be tinted, but they have a chance to see what's going on. I think right there you see the message of just like, when you get too caught up in the glam and the entertainment and the consumerism, you do miss the actual struggles that people who are similar to you are facing.
I also think you could even go as simple as, this isn't actually a real thing that happens to people that call Ubers, right? Like,
oh yeah, it does happen.
Somebody
for
will
real.
Kidnap them. They get into the wrong car, so they tell you to double check and make sure that it's actually the right license plate, or you know who the driver is that's picking you up.
Name.
This can really happen. It's also kind of ironic that like they're kidnapping people to put them like into an old school like plantation, but they're using like modern technology to do the kidnapping,
Yep.
But yeah, Uber's that's a very real danger, and it's like easy to see how that can happen to somebody, especially if they've been partying and hanging out, and they're not really paying attention, and it's a danger for a lot of women in particular. And obviously this happens to Veronica.
Also, I'm not sure if this was purposefully meant, but we do see that Elizabeth, him's daughter, she has a pin of her family crest on the lapel. It's also the same crest that gets branded into Veronica at the beginning of the movie. I don't think they meant this on purpose, but that looks like a congressional pin if I've ever seen one. Goes right on the lapel, and Democrats and Republicans, they both wear those pins to let them know, to let everybody know where they work. And that right there to me was like, huh. And then finding out that that her father is a senator.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely a message there that you can look into if you want to.
I think personally the idea is that, like him says at the end of the movie when he meets his end, he says, it's like cutting off the head of a hydra. We have people everywhere in every position. So I think that's just, the idea is that racism is everywhere. Nobody is exempt from their feelings of personal bias, for if we're being kind about it.
Hail Hydra.
Exactly. And on a literal and on a literal level in the movie, he's saying that, listen, I'm not the only one. Like, there are plenty of high value people all over the country who believe in what we believe in, and that is very frightening. As just like we were talking about with the impeachment at the beginning, like, there are still people who, regardless of the fact that they were in danger, still might not vote to convict this man. Like, they could put in place they could put fucking Mike Pence in place in 4 years, and even for as much of a monster as he is, he still knew, like, constitutionally, I'm not allowed to fucking turn over the results for you. And later on that day, there was a mob 100 feet away from where he was hiding with his family. So it does blow my mind that we do have politicians like that. And in the movie, of course we do. Like I said, it is a very literal representation of, I think, anxieties of people of color. But I do think it is also a reality, because whereas you may not have people who are kidnapping you and forcing you to be slaves, you do have a prison industrial complex that is going to be 3 times more likely to enslave you than they are a white counterpart. Or I should say lock you up. You also have people who are enacting out policies and practices from the eras of segregation, from Jim Crow, from chattel slavery, and they don't even know it, but like those practices are still being enacted today. Did you have anything else, as far as either of you, anything else regarding like the microaggressions and stuff she experiences?
There's the scene where Veronica and her husband are in the kitchen, and Veronica is getting into it with that other representative about, the stress that people of color face every day, and he's sort of just standing there like, just like mocking it, making fun of it, and of course there's the moment in the hotel room or in the hotel where the woman at the desk, who winds up being one of these, secret society crazy people.
Oh, I didn't know that she was. I just thought she was a bitch.
Oh no, if you watch the movie again, the scene where they're at the dinner party, at the plantation where they have all those women serving them, the people of color, all those black women. You can see that girl walking with Elizabeth in that scene. So she is very much a member of that secret society.
That's wild.
Wait, the little girl or the woman who... No, you are talking about the woman who was at the desk who ignored Janelle or Veronica, right?
That's who I'm talking about.
Oh,
yes.
I'm going to have to take your word for it, because I'm definitely not watching the movie again. Not that it was a bad movie. I don't have to see fucking snuff film again.
Nick, thanks for coming on. We're gonna shit all over your projects now.
Look, man, I'm down for the real talk, man. I mean,
I'm gonna assume Nick doesn't have an allegiance. Now let's talk about that fucking movie Sonic.
You know what? That was just for the record, that was an awesome movie to work on.
I haven't watched it yet, but I really want to.
It was an awesome movie to watch, I've heard, but I haven't watched it myself yet. I'm sorry.
It was. I mean, the movie's a lot of fun, and but working on it, being a member of that team for as short a period of time as I was one of my best, working experiences as a professional in the film industry. But we're sort of digressing a little bit. I'm sorry.
That's what we do at this podcast, so don't sweat it. Speaking of which, I'm just going to go through a few other things I noticed about the film. We're not going to necessarily go into them, but I thought it was important. They do bring up the term boy, which was also brought up a couple weeks ago on Malcolm X. It is a term that does have its roots in segregation and in white supremacy. It's a very subverted ethnic slur, but boy, depending on who you use it on, is definitely one. There's a moment where Jasper instigates that guy and says, like, give me an excuse.
Yep.
I think that might be a good time to go into this, because that right there, it reminded me of this protest I saw a while back where, it was crowd of black people facing down some riot police, and one guy was in front of all the people and he said, don't give them a reason. Don't give them a reason. Like, they're just like waiting for a reason at any moment. And, you cannot talk about white supremacy in the United States without talking about policing, without talking about the origins of policing, which was slave patrol. You do have Janelle Monáe on interviews who's saying that this movie is kind of a critique on American policing. Like, she brings it up, but I think it's more of, white supremacy specifically, because who comes to save them at the end? The police. Like, at the end of the day, it's a tough fight to fight, because who's going to hold criminals accountable? It does have to be law enforcement, but
you could argue that they don't save her, right? That she saves herself.
You could absolutely argue that, yeah. Because they don't even see her until she's already off the plantation. Going to see a bunch of other people who probably wish the South had won, and they're going to watch another battle reenactment. But my thing is this, Nick, since we've known you, it's been a part of, at least in my mind, a part of your environment. You grew up in a cop family. Your father was a cop. He might still be. I don't know when they retire. I don't know things, but you know, in all the movies that we, you know, the little shorts that we put together in high school doing stupid shit, you know, the main character, you know, it had to be a cop or a detective or something like that. And I think that's our go-to, especially when we're growing up, because Ty, you and I did it too. We think of stories, we're going to be like, all right, this guy's in the military, this guy's a cop, you know, that's the thing.
Always, yep.
Yeah, now we've talked about the connections between white supremacy and policing on this podcast before. I'm not going out and calling your dad a Klan member, but I want to ask you, Nick, how has it been for you being the son of a cop during this time? You know, as the years go by, seeing what you see on the news, seeing how it's reacted to. I'm not going to ask you like, you know, listen, do you support Blue Lives Matter or what? But but just how is it? What runs through your head when you see people being like, you know, fuck the police, and you're like, oh, well, my dad's a police that you want to fuck, or, well, not fuck, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because certainly the last couple of years have been transformative for me personally, because, you know, when this was first, or I shouldn't say first because that's not true, but when this really started to become more of a public issue, when this really started to air itself on national television and whatnot.
For our generation, because it's happened.
Well, where it started to become, you know, it was mainstream news all the time. You know, my first instinct is to always be like, it was to always say, well, you know, it's a difficult position for law enforcement to be in. I mean, you know, in a lot of ways, you're sort of fighting for your life. You have to worry about that. I mean, and like, you're forced to make a split-second decision, and, you know, if you're a young man or you don't have a lot of experience, which is often the case,
unfortunately,
like, what are you supposed to do? You're most likely going to make the wrong decision. But, you know, as time has gone by, I really, like, I can't make that excuse anymore. I really can't, because the system is just so, it's just so messed up, and it just doesn't work, and it's wrong. Yeah, well, right, yeah, for lack of a better word, yeah. But my dad and I, we've gotten into some bitter arguments about these things.
Really? You know, because he always seemed to be a pretty cool dude. So,
well, he is. He's my father is very, very, very liberal. He is by no means a Blue Lives Matter guy at all. It's just that he has a sensitivity that I mean, I certainly don't have, because I'm not in law enforcement, and that I think a lot of people don't have because they're not in law enforcement. But he is also, at the root of it, a white man with experience in a workplace that is toxically racist. So his point of view, I think, is it's skewed a little bit because of that. But I've been very fortunate because, well, certainly because my girlfriend, she's in political communications. Her current candidate is a young woman of color running for Boston for mayor, running for the mayor of Boston, excuse me. And I've had, at this point, certainly some, you know, at the very least, interactions with people of color that I normally wouldn't have had, and it's given me more of a sensitivity to what they're struggling with on a day-to-day basis, you know, having to worry about getting into a car, whether or not they're going to be killed by a cop who pulls them over for a broken broken taillight or some shit. I mean, at this point currently, just to answer your question, I don't really identify with that law enforcement side of it anymore. Like, it's gone too far for me where I can't support it. You know, I can't make excuses for it. I don't see it. You know, I'm very much at the point personally where it's like, you know, this defund the motherfucking police. Like, you know, like, this is a big problem. We have a big problem.
I really appreciate your honesty in this, because, this is something that we've had to come to terms with too, as, you know, Tyler and I have, I think it's only literally one friend right now. And even then, at best, he's an acquaintance, because we really haven't talked much since he became a fucking cop. But, like, you know, we have one where, you know, we had this situation where it's like, where do we draw the line? Where do we draw the line between, you know, the fun, geeky kid who loved to go to wrestling shows with us and, you know, the guy who told me that he wanted to pull a cop out on on some a dude experiencing homelessness, running up to him really quick because he didn't know what to do because he was undertrained. You know, if I haven't said it before, I'll say it now. I do think that it is a disservice to young men and women to put them into a dangerous job and not fucking train them for that job. You know, you don't, you know, as far as I know, you don't see people going overseas, you know, to terrorize other countries and not have them trained to do their job. Like, even soldiers have to follow a certain Ty, what was it called again? What's their process called again? They have to follow.
I don't remember.
Conflict. You had it in a previous episode. That's why I thought you would have it. But anyway, they have to follow a set of rules before even like raising their rifle to somebody else. So why shouldn't the cops? Why shouldn't we train them more? You know, I think from the case of your father, like, he may not be
code of conduct, the soldier's code of conduct, I believe is what it is.
That was a lot simpler than I was making it. But rules of escalation. Is that it? Is it rules of escalation? I think it might be rules of escalation. Something like that.
They both apply.
But their code of conduct of escalation. All of that. You know, like, I think like someone like your father, who from my albeit limited experiences with him seems to be a good man. You and your sister seem to be good people. So, like, you know, your parents had to at least done somewhat of a good job. You know, you seem like solid folks. You know, so, but I think like he might see one of the good cops that he knew in every cop that dies or every cop that is being accused of committing a terrible act. Like, you know, I think that's the problem, is there's this stencil of the quote unquote good cop that's automatically painted over all of them. And that does a disservice to the good people who are cops. Notice I make that distinction.
I mean, it's a system that's racist, right? It's systematically racist. So it's a problem. So I think no matter how good of a person you are to be put into that system, you know, it's hard to kind of break that, right? You know, like, there's only so much you can do as one person, and I think, you know, as long as we don't confront the system as a whole and figure out how to fix it, whether that's defunding the police or, you know, what. Because I know you mentioned they're not properly trained, but then some places they are trained. They're overly trained, right? But they're trained in the wrong ways.
And overly supplied.
You know, like there's that military style
that one
training
form called killology, I think.
Yes, you know, and so we've tried overtraining, we've tried undertraining, you know, nothing seems to really work here.
In my non-expert opinion,
that's all we have on this podcast. You're good.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying that the police are poorly equipped to deal with a lot of the circumstances that they're thrust into. I mean, they're not therapists. You know, like, so many of the things that they're called in to solve, you know, a lot of it is, you know, it's homelessness or it's mental illness or it's drug addiction, and they're really poorly equipped to deal with that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. I think we've actually talked about that a few times. You know, it's like someone's you know, suicidal and they want to hurt themselves. Why are you calling the police, right? Like, what are they gonna do? You know what I mean? They're not, like you said, they're not equipped to deal with something like that. You know, you need someone who's actually trained to deal with those kind of specific situations.
Right, and the thing that, you know, the difference sort of in the opinion that my dad and I share, or that we argue about from time to time, is that he doesn't fully, like, there was a while where he didn't get what defund the police meant. He just assumed that meant completely strip them of a budget, which is not necessarily what defund the police means. It means, you know, yes, you don't give them as much money, but you take that money and you divert it to other places that are better equipped to deal with those issues, so that they're not the one solely responsible for dealing with drug addiction cases or mental health cases or homelessness or stuff like that. So people who are trained to deal with those problems can deal with those problems, as opposed to having like a trigger happy, you know, novice cop show up and just be like, fuck it, I'm going to draw my gun and just start blasting people away because I don't know what else to do.
Yeah, you don't want Danny DeVito showing up. So I just started blasting.
But I don't see so good, so I miss most of the time.
Yeah, exactly. I know, it's a good point. And honestly, if you know, if you do want to, you know, give the benefit of the doubt and do the diplomatic thing, you don't want a kid showing up who's unprepared and afraid of everything. Like, you know, you go, anyone who hasn't yet, I was just talking about how much of a snuff film this fucking is. Go, you know, if you haven't seen the Philando Castile video, just that everybody in that clip was afraid, including the cop who fucking killed this guy.
Right.
He was like, oh, like he didn't know what the fuck was going on. Nobody knew what was going on. It was fucking terrible.
I was just gonna say, just for the record, in my dad's career as an agent, his skills in diplomacy and his de-escalation skills are exceptional. In fact, he's got awards that I've seen for those things.
As they should be. That's what you're supposed to do. Yeah.
There have been a number of situations where he's been thrust into a situation that potentially could end up very dangerous. But he doesn't go in guns blazing. He goes in and he talks to people, and he knows how to talk to people. And he's able to get, as the average person would describe it, a violent criminal to not respond violently. And, a lot of outcomes have, a lot of poor outcomes have been avoided. In fact, towards the end of my dad's career, there was one incident where he was called in to talk to a criminal. He had been in Attica for like 8 years or something like that. He was like a really hardened criminal, and they were trying to get his agency. They were trying to get DNA material from him. They were trying to get a swab of his mouth, and he refused to let anybody he refused to let anybody do that. In fact, the woman who was trying to get the DNA, he was spitting at her and whatnot. Yeah, screaming and whatnot.
Oh, catch it on the swab right there. Sorry.
I mean, so they asked for somebody to come in and try and get that DNA, and I forget how my dad got roped into it, but he got in, he showed up, and the U.S. Marshals basically said, yeah, this is a waste of your time. Like, you're never going to get the DNA from this guy. Like, he's just such a piece of shit. And so, sure enough, dad goes in, talks to the guy for maybe 10 or 20 minutes, and the U.S. Marshals were taking bets as to whether or not he could get this guy to not behave violently, to get, they were taking bets whether or not my dad could actually convince him to give his DNA. Not only did he convince him to do it, but he got him to say, I actually want the woman who I spit at to take the DNA. I feel really bad about what I did.
And he didn't spit in her face again, like in Silence of the Lambs?
No, not nothing like that. But, it just goes to show you that skill is so important for somebody who works in law enforcement, and so few people have it.
And I think that's what people want, right? They want someone to be able to walk in there and de-escalate. That's what we're looking for. Someone who knows how to handle that situation and not make it worse, not pull a weapon, not actually injure somebody, right? And I think that's kind of what people want. If we can get to a point where the majority of law enforcement can do that, on a regular basis, and we don't have these unnecessary killings and injuries that are happening so often, then maybe we can show, it can work, right? Like I think that's kind of the goal.
Well, I mean, again, another, interesting detail. My dad had a colleague there who went with him, and he was calling the guy. He's like, "Oh, you piece of shit, you scumbag!" Like, was just cursing him out and calling him horrible shit. And at one point, my father just said to him, "Dude, get the fuck out of here. Let me handle this." And the guy left, and calmed this other guy down. Like, it was just, it's just like his rule is always treat people like human beings, and they'll be respectful to you in return. Like, even people who are hardened criminals. So this idea, this concept that, like, if you're dealing with somebody who has a violent history, you have to deal with them violently or aggressively. It's total baloney.
Like I said, just treat them like a human being, right? Because that's what we all are. And I think, if you can speak to someone in that way and treat them with respect, you'll get a much better response. And that's for any profession, I think. That's across the board. You treat someone like a human, you're going to get a better response.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 100%. We've heard Intel officials say like, they're in counterterrorism. They're talking to terrorists and suspected terrorists, and like the torture report came out I think 40 years ago, maybe 5 at this point, and it ultimately showed that torture didn't work. Like, all this terrible stuff they did to prisoners and suspected terrorists, a complete violation of human rights to them. You know, this one guy I saw in an interview when I was you'd have to go back to the show notes and sources for Batman v Superman, I think, in order to get this source. But he said that, you know, when you go in to talk to this person, you don't, and I know we're not talking about Antebellum, but this is important shit. When you go in to talk to this person, you don't want to start, you know, telling them about, you know, that you're going to threaten them and all this other stuff. You just go, listen, you're going to be here for life. I know that. You know that. You have kids. You have a wife. You want your kid to go to a good school. Like, you really start appealing to their humanity, because that's how you're going to get what you need out of these people. And
yeah,
you know, that you've heard talking law enforcement with Booch, Nick, and Ty. I don't know why I put you last, Ty. That's fucked up.
That's all right. I did want to bring up one other quick thing.
First.
You know, Nick mentioned for him, you know, getting to know more people of color really opened his eyes, right? And I've spoken numerous times about how that's happened for me, you know, dating a Hispanic woman and getting to know her family and friends and things like that. And I think that happens so often for white people. That's kind of how we you know, we get to that point.
Disassociate.
Yeah, and it's just it's kind of wild to really think about that. It takes getting to know someone personally, right? To see that, for us to be able to put ourselves in their shoes and understand their struggle. And I think that kind of really sums up white privilege in a lot of ways, you know, because if we need to literally know someone who has suffered in order to understand their struggle, then we've been really fortunate. And I think that seems to be the case for the majority of white people, especially here in the U.S.
Yeah, that was a big thing for me too. I mentioned that I was raised as a white man by a Hispanic man, and it wasn't until I went to school and met more people of color. And even then, dude, thank God they had so much patience, because like if I were Josh, I would have kicked my own ass so many times for like just the stupid stuff I said to him, because I thought it was cool. I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
You know, and whereas I'm not like a bigoted person, like those are microaggressions. Which Nick brought up earlier in the film, and I do want to point out a few more of them. We do have when Elizabeth first talks to Veronica, she makes the comment about, oh, that lipstick would never look good with my shade of skin, but it looks great with yours.
She also says, I didn't mean to trigger you, which I thought was...
I was about to say that. Yes, you know, which is such like a gaslighty term, because it's kind of like, oh, you lost because you were triggered. It's like, no, you said something that's fucking stupid, and I'm gonna call you out on it.
Yeah,
it's not just about being triggered,
it's a way to turn it around on the victim, right? You know, you're like, oh, this upset you, it's your fault, rather than, oh, I shouldn't have said that.
Which is a big time political discourse, and we don't just see it on the right. We do see it on the so-called left as well. I actually left that Facebook group the other day, conservatives comparing things that aren't comparable.
Oh,
because,
really?
like, I'm just done with the idea of like, yeah, let's look, this person posted something stupid, let's go shit on them. Like, they're not going and changing anybody's mind. They're going and just defending the Democrats over and over again.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing constructive from it. And if we learned anything from last week, it's that we have to be constructive. We can't just be yelling out into the void or being angry. We have to do something on if it's a small level or a large level, to make a difference. You know, when, you know, I talked about how Fred Hampton didn't just, you know, quote communist leaders and stuff. He literally put into practice the idea of, okay, we're going to help the community with food and resources and education and healthcare and stuff. So, you know, anyone listening, just remember that you know, that change does start with you. Yeah, we also saw that Elizabeth sent her a cotton plant, which is pretty fucked up. When she was in the Jefferson suite, for those of you who don't know, Thomas Jefferson raped a bunch of his slaves and had a bunch of illegitimate children.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, Mike. It's interesting that you say that, I'm sorry, because I didn't know that was a cotton plant, and I'm pretty sure that the editorial team I worked with did not know that was a cotton.
Oh, wow.
Oh, get out of here. I didn't know the first time, I don't think, but I looked at it this time. I was like, there's fucking cotton on that thing. Oh, this is ridiculous.
Well, it just goes to show you, like, you know, what page that we were on at the time, that we probably should have been operating at a higher level, because it's like, oh, we didn't observe that. Jesus. Okay.
At least you observed the background role. Like, you know, I don't know exactly what kind of work they were doing on this film, but all I know is that when I've done background work, if you're dancing, if you're yelling, if you're talking in the background, you're pantomiming everything. You make no sounds at all. So maybe they did give a couple guys extra, you know, like, oh, maybe you could talk. Or this one guy was just like, hey, let me yell out the N-word real quick. Well, I can't. Let me really get into the role of this background character. Like, I'm sorry, I'm still just
he was trying to get a larger role
about that.
He was trying to get a larger role.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly what happened that one instance, and like, I'm sitting there watching Dallas, and I'm like, oh no, man, no.
One of the directors is black too, right? Gerard Bush.
So Gerard, yes, Gerard is. His husband Chris is not.
Oh, is he the other writer?
So he's the other writer / director. Yeah.
Oh, so I didn't know they were a couple. Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yes, they are. They're married. As far as I understand it, they're married.
Unless they've fallen out since then, who knows? We also another thing I noticed is we see that Jasper, he asks the slaves to sing him a tune, like one of those old slave hymnals and stuff, and they don't do it for him, but they finally do start whistling later when Veronica gives the message that, listen, we're escaping tonight, like tonight's the night. And, you know, and that right there just goes to show again, like, how white people are fine with being entertained by black people, but do not want the message that comes with it. Like, those slave hymnals were messages. Everything they did was messages. Even capoeira, the, you know, Brazilian breakdancing martial art, like, that was made up by Brazilian slaves, and there's those dances would send messages. The cornrows or braids in enslaved people's hair would be maps to get to freedom. Like, everything is a message, and, you know, if we continue that into today, we should be willing to look at that message in our rap music, in our spoken word poems, in our actors, in our everything. And and you know, the football players, right? Not just ignore what is being told to us. All right, now we're running a little bit over this episode, so I want to talk about two more things. If you guys want to go to our show notes and sources, you are more than welcome to, because there's a lot more in there. A lot of it is literally just my kind of word salad as I put it from my brain onto the post. But I want to talk about, oh, she also had a fucking Obama portrait in her living room. But anyway, I want to talk about two things. She quotes Assata Shakur, which is a very radical thing to do. She doesn't quote MLK. She quotes Assata Shakur by saying the only thing we have to lose are our chains. Do either of you guys know who Assata is?
I don't, but I'm not positive about this. It's been, you know, some time since I worked on it, but I think that quote that she adds in that speech that she makes was one that she wanted to add. Like, that's one that Janelle Monáe said, I want this in the speech, if I'm remembering correctly. Because I do believe that the speech was written differently in the script.
Well, it makes sense to me because...
that's pretty cool. So.
Yeah, because in one of the interviews she was giving that I saw on YouTube, she did, like, specifically name drop Assata Shakur, which it's not like name dropping... you know, a more tame black activist. I don't believe Assata was part of the Black Liberation Front, and there was a warrant out for her arrest because she had supposedly killed a cop. So after she was in prison, she escaped to Cuba, where she continues her black activism currently and is on the run from the United States. That's who Janelle decided to quote in this fucking movie.
Yeah.
Which is a baller move, in my opinion. I'll throw the interviews in this just because Asada, she has they did a piece on her years ago in which they interviewed her and also interviewed cops. And it was very interesting to hear, like, she would be like, yeah, well, the cops shot me. They left me there to die. I didn't kill any of them. They're making it up. And then there's a cop going like, the criminal element believes that they are the victim. And we will find her, if we need to kidnap her. Like, there's so much shit that they're saying that's just like, it's fucked up. But anyway, Asada Shakur, awesome name drop. Now, the butterfly tattoo. I was trying to look up some symbolism, trying to make my own out of it. The symbolism I ultimately ended up landing on, online at least, was that it was about needing to evolve the way that we run this country so that way everybody else is equal. Did either of you get a different symbolism out of it, or does one of you know the specific symbolism of it?
This was never discussed really in the editing room, what the symbol of what the butterfly really meant. I mean, maybe like here and there.
You weren't just like eating lo mein and going like, hey, what's this fucking butterfly mean?
I don't think, well, I mean, it's not to that extent, but I don't think I think we may have discussed it once or twice, but I don't think we delved into it too much. But I would say that your analysis of it is accurate. I would think that that's probably what that meant.
Well, I did have a Zoom call with Gerard and Chris this morning.
Oh, what did they tell you?
In detail. So
please let us know.
Not true. No, I think that's a pretty accurate interpretation that you brought up, Mike. I also concur.
Well, that was the one that I landed on when I was looking for it. I have a slightly different interpretation of it because on the cover of this we see. As I do. On the cover of this, we see the butterfly covering her mouth. We also see the butterfly that is on the ankle of the woman who ultimately ends up hanging herself, who earlier miscarried in the film because of the way that she was abused by one of the quote-unquote Confederates. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, and also it's on the cover of Veronica's book, which is all about like, decolonizing your mind or inclusion. Well, it was one of those things. Watch the movie. But I think the butterfly to me represents the United States because you have this like small thing that writhes around and it becomes ugly and hardened as it evolves. And, when we think about the United States history, we go, oh, well, things used to be ugly, but they're much better now. They're beautiful. They've, everybody is equal now and we all have cell phones and cars and everything's fine. And meanwhile, we still see that butterfly silencing Veronica on the cover. To me, that butterfly is the U.S., that it may look pretty, but it still comes from the same place. And, the evolution has to continue. You can't just continue to be the thing you were at your core. That's Brother Booch's take on it, yo.
I always look forward to your takes every episode on something. So that's a good one. The majority of what I know about butterflies comes from Pokemon, so I'm not going to come up with my own interpretations here.
And of course, the butterflies in Pokemon are known as Butterfree. But freedom isn't something we're going to see anytime soon.
I do have a question for Nick. Can you tell us anything about the final horseback riding sequence where Elizabeth is killed being run into a Robert E. Lee statue?
Oh, I forgot that was a Robert E. Lee statue. That's great.
How great is that?
That, is, as you could imagine, a visual effect. They don't actually drag her through the
right, of course.
So that was pretty much mocked up in post. I think there was a doll in there, and that was what ran into the thing. But anyway, that was an interesting scene. I actually did the opening part of that scene where Elizabeth gives that monologue, that really like long one. Yep. So I did a version of that scene. I cut a version of that scene. I did a little work on it, and that was tough because the character sort of rambles a lot, so there's a lot of inconsistency in that scene, and it was hard to match it up in a way that made a lot of sense. Jenna Malone really goes completely batshit with that character. It's actually kind of remarkable to see.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as just random stuff is concerned, she got injured during that scene.
Really?
She, yeah. So where she's on the horse and she's firing the gun.
Yes.
Well, there was a misfire in one of the takes, and the gun went off, and it I don't remember if it was the sparks or the smoke, but it like went in her eyes and it like, like, yeah. So she was like blind for a second. I remember seeing that.
Yikes.
Yeah, that was too bad. But that was I would be willing to bet that was a hard scene for the cast to go through, because I know they had to take breaks and they were like, all right, enough. Like, we've had enough of this. Like, we need a minute, because it's so emotionally charged.
It definitely is.
Yeah, the thing that common viewer may not understand about acting is that good actors, they really do they go to emotions. An actor, as far as I understand, the way I act, has a tool chest of different emotions, and those emotions come from specific events. A lot of it for me is like, all right, my fucking mom dying. Like, all right, it sucks she died, but now I have that in my tool chest, and I'm like, all right, if I need to cry about something, boom, I'm calling on that. If I'm going to play somebody who's crying while talking to their lover and all this other stuff, boom, I'm calling on marrying my wife. Like, I have all these things, and it is a lot to put yourself in that position. And if you're also a good person playing a problematic person, that is very difficult to do too, because I've done that, and it both acting and playing Dungeons and Dragons, I've played a villain, and it's just exhausting. It's exhausting for everybody involved. So I'm glad you brought that up, Nick. And Ty, I'm glad that you brought up that scene specifically, because I wasn't going to mention it, but now that it's out there, this scene, it kind of makes sense why a lot of the terrible stuff was shown at the beginning of the movie, because it has to justify what Veronica does to these people at the end, which is justified either way. We see a similar scene in Get Out, where he's finally escaping, and like he's stabbing them with antlers and stuff. And
it's survival.
Yeah, this to me though, I'm not sure if it hit the way they wanted it to, at least for me, and here's why. Because there is a very real fear in white America and this is why I think they haven't been able to move past slavery or racism. I think at any time people of color are willing to move past it, should they be given the proper resources and proper treatment as a first-class citizen in the United States. But it's the powers that be that say, as soon as we give these people the resources that we have, as soon as we give them the means, they're going to fucking kill us. They're going to do to us what we did to them, which is what happens in this movie. And, once again, I don't think it was purposeful, but I think it speaks to the fear of white people, who are like, oh, well, as soon as these black people get the chance, they'll do to us what we did to them. And, she even burns the senator and Jasper and other white villain in the the little house the little shed where they burn those people, which is also fucking terrible. That harkened back to a Malcolm X analogy that he made too, that like, if racial tension is like a powder keg and the United States is the house, you better move that racial tension out, because the house is going to catch fire. That was part of his segregation thing, where he was like, give us the means to go back to Africa and get the fuck out of your hair, because you keep us here, you keep doing this, shit's going to get bad. Right. I doubt it was meant that way, but no. And it was great to see her serve some justice after everything that was done to her and her fellow
kidnapped persons. The scene also kind of, for me, like it seems like the senator's in charge here, but if you listen to Elizabeth's speech, she's kind of the brains behind the operation more. She's the one that's handpicked everybody except Veronica, right, who's causing all this trouble. It's kind of up to her to clean up the mess of her father. I just thought that was an interesting little moment there to think about.
That's the idea, is that that Elizabeth is running the show, and the senator is just throwing his weight around because he can.
To me, that kind of screams first wave feminism too, because the feminist movement did originate from like white women. Don't quote me on it, but I know that white women were at the forefront while black women were literally at the back of the feminist group. And, it blows my mind how there are women who can realize they are being oppressed by the system and yet not acknowledge the oppression of other women of color within that system. which I think we also might have spoken about in Lovecraft a little bit too.
Yes, definitely.
But yeah, we do see a lot of that today. You know, a lot of so-called feminists, you know, like slut shaming or turning on women or whatever. But yeah, that being said, I think I've shared every thought I have on this movie. If I haven't, check out the show notes and sources when you get the chance. Ty, do you have any final thoughts?
No, you know, overall, I did enjoy the film. I didn't love it, Nick. Sorry, I didn't love the film. I thought it had some great moments.
Nick's having a threesome with the directors later, so you better hope.
I'm not sure it's a movie that I'd like that I would rewatch over and over again. But I think that it had some really good messages, and I thought the idea was really, really great. You know, this idea of kind of this white supremacist group trying to bring back a modern day slavery. It was a solid twist, I'll say. But yeah, it wasn't always successful for me, but overall I thought I had a really good message, and I'm glad we were able to talk about this today.
And Nick, how about yourself, man?
You know, I really enjoyed working on it. I mean, you know, the editor I work with, John, he's really, really brilliant. And like we really all, I mean, for me personally as a creative, I really had like an opportunity to create, to flex some creative muscle to a certain extent, and that was awesome. Did any of you guys read the reviews for the film?
Just briefly.
I did not, and you know what? We should make that a part of the podcast too, because I did it with a couple episodes and it flowed pretty well. You know, we should read the reviews, but how was it received?
Not well.
Yeah, that's
it wasn't. The critics did not like it. They didn't like it. They thought it was too heavy-handed, and they thought a lot of what happened in it was unnecessary.
Oh shit! I'm one of those critics, I guess.
Well, before I got on with you, I just was casually looking through the IMDb reviews, and there was one that stood out to me, and it was basically, it was just some guy. He said, I feel like I didn't like this movie. I feel like I should have because I'm a black man, but I did not like this movie. And he went on further to say, like, this seems like a great concept, but it was like, it felt super rushed. And granted, there's a grain of truth there.
Yeah.
Well, I think but you know what? I think this movie came out potentially at the wrong time. I think that if this movie were to come out in the next 6 months, the response would be a lot different. And I say that because of the sacking of our capital that took place on January 6th.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people watched this movie and were like, oh, that could never happen. That's so out on Pluto. I think like after we've had this wake-up call at the beginning of last month, I think people were like, oh, that actually does seem like something that potentially
totally feasible. Gerard and Chris were like, we fucking told you. Come on, right?
And when you see like a man walking through the Capitol with the Confederate flag, there's no question as to whether or not he is a racist. Like, because I'm sure there are plenty of people who are like, oh, well, they're Trump supporters, but they're not racist, or like they're not a white supremacist group. Like, no, like, dude, they're intertwined, and this guy specifically is racist. And then you see in this movie, the Confederate flag is always there. It's always in the background until Veronica takes it down at the very end. But yeah, that's interesting because Janelle and she thought that the movie was coming out at a perfect time. This movie came out in September of 2020. So, but I see your point with that. Like, if it did come out after people knew that racism still existed, the fucking idiots. Because that was their thing. They were like, oh, you know, Trump doesn't have extremists. Like, these people are just, you know, they just love America. Blah blah blah. No, they fucking love that one guy, and what they do love about him. He didn't build a fucking wall. What do you love about him? Like, what do you like? Like, you know, the dude hasn't done shit to help you. He was talking shit about the people who did go to the Capitol to fucking, you know, sack it. Like you said, just throw their fucking sacks all over it. Literally
dragging their sacks across the floor.
Their sacks were all over, and it was terrible. They're still cleaning up hairs from it. We're super mature on this podcast, but it's interesting because I was one of those people who was like, it's too much. But the heavy-handedness of saying when people say these terms, when people have these ideologies, they really mean they want the antebellum period back. I think it gets that across pretty well. I lost it a little bit in going like, fuck, did they have to show this? Did they have to show that? You know, which I'm not going to argue whether or not that was the right choice artistically, because, you know, I was talking before, the impeachment hearing, they had to show a lot of shit to try and get these fucking monsters to convict Trump, these slimy fucking worms, to do the right thing. Like, so sometimes you have to show the real gruesome nature of something to show the reality of it. In the words of Ra's al Ghul in Batman Begins, people need dramatic examples to shake them out of apathy. And in the words of Liam Neeson, who played him, I was searching around for any black bastard who I could get my hands on, or something like that. I don't remember exactly what he said.
I think that literally is what he said. I think that literally word for word is what he said.
Yeah, and then he went out to dinner with Mel Gibson afterwards. Not true. not actually true, but I wouldn't be surprised.
Did they watch The Passion of the Christ afterwards?
They're watching the Passion. He was like, "Oh my God, this is a great film, Mel." And he's like, "Thanks, mate. I'll tell you, these Jews, they're not doing the right thing.
God.
I fucking hate them. He killed Jesus. Nice little party. Why was not invited?"
That's twice it's Always Sunny's been brought up.
Yeah, I've twice I brought up what?
I think it's Nick. Nick's here, and our mind always goes to It's Always Sunny.
Oh, I did. Nick is
I am
Nick is
die-hard Sunny.
Yes.
Nick, before we close out, do you want anyone to follow you on social media at all? Or
I don't have a social media.
You're just behind the scenes doing your work.
I'm just doing my thing. Yeah.
That is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
That is absolutely fine.
I just do my thing, and you know, that's it. I mean, what you're hearing from me is entirely just my opinion on the matter. I don't have any hard facts from the directors or the real creatives. So, no, I said what you're hearing from me is like I said, just my opinion. So,
and honestly, that is all we share on this podcast. Like, we're not, you know, I remember, you know, behind the scenes, my cousin told me she was a little bit nervous about being on the podcast last week, and I'm like, what? Like, listen to an episode. We don't sound professional. And she's like, I did listen to an episode. I'm like, you got to be kidding. Like, we don't know what the fuck we're talking about. But that's why we have show notes and sources, and a lot of it is our opinions. And I will preface my opinions by saying whether or not I'm sure of them, or I think we do have to just realize that there is a human nature to everybody, and we were so happy to have this human on this episode, Nick, to provide a different point of view that we definitely wouldn't have had. You coastal LA elite calling in from New York. So thank you so much for being on and being a friend of the pod.
It was a pleasure, guys. Thank you.
You know, that being said, next week, if you want to prepare for our episode, which movie are we watching, Ty?
I think we were going to do Into the Spiderverse first, right? Something a little lighter.
Into the Spiderverse, that's right. Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse, with following up our Black Trauma Month with Black Triumph Month, with a little dash of trauma, depending on what we're reviewing.
Yeah, just general trauma.
That's what we're going to be reviewing next week. Yeah, just general trauma. Yeah, because every Spider-Man goes through Miles goes through trauma because of his Spider-Man-ness.
Yes.
Not necessarily because
it's Spider-Man trauma.
His uncle is killed by a white guy with a gun. Yes, Spider trauma. But that being said, all of you, if you want to find us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at PolitiPopPod. If you want to email us, you can find us at politipopcast@gmail.com. If you're not sure, you agree with what we're saying, or if you do agree, or just want to share your thoughts, go for it. You can find our show notes and sources at politipoppodcast.wordpress.com. Special thanks to all of you listeners and to Antonia Chava for logo design. For the Politipop podcast, I have been Mike Booch.
I have been Ty.
Oh, do you want to say I've been Nick, or it doesn't matter?
No, I just, it's all good. I'm just, yeah.
He's been. And remember, people, no matter what you're watching, what you're listening to, whatever media you're consuming to fight the power, hopefully not conform to it, never stop thinking, never stop learning, and always remember to read between the lines.
And scene.
There we go.